revival for our association, and we're thankful to be here on tonight. Keeping in mind that this is May, and we only have one more Wednesday in May. That will end our session before our intermediate, before we have an intercession. So we will do this Wednesday and next Wednesday, and that will end May. When we go into June, we will be on a hiatus. So we want to, at this time, just try to bring us up to date with where we have been thus far, to kind of recap where we have been. We have tried to give pretty much a synopsis of the Old Testament. We went through the first 5 books of the law, and those are the actual first 5 books. In fact, for a while, to the children of Israel, that was the only Bible that was available to them. When we think of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, those were the only books they had, the 5 books of law, the Pentateuch. We had sort of taken some snippets from each one of those books, and hopefully somewhere in the interim you have had opportunity to read something out of each book. Of course, your goal ought to be to read the entire Bible, but you should have read some snippets from each one of those 5 books, those books of the law. And then there you go into what we call the history. And the history begins with Joshua. The reason why it's a natural sequence is that when we finish the law, it kind of concludes the life of Moses. In fact, Moses, he's terminated pretty much in the book of Deuteronomy, and he passes the torch to Joshua. And also keeping in mind the geographical setting, Moses is still in the desert region. He hasn't crossed over the Jordan River. He crossed out of Egypt, he crossed the Red Sea, but he's been in the desert region. And they stayed in that desert region 40 years. And it was, when we consider that it was Joshua who led them across the Jordan River, and leading them across the Jordan River, now they're in the land that God had promised them from the outset. It is in this land that they began to divide it up. They began to utilize the promise that God had given to Abraham, and they began to divide the land up. So that's where we had sort of parked in Joshua, because Joshua is sort of a transition book. It's kind of like they're going into the promised land where they have left out of Egypt, and now after traveling in the desert 40 years, the second generation enters into the promised land under the leadership of Joshua. Now, I'm hoping that you will have an opportunity to read Joshua, but I'm going to give you a synopsis of what Joshua really tells us. You can read it, and you can read it in its entirety, and you may not even come to this conclusion after you read it. But Joshua is pretty much the beginning of the rise of the children of Israel. This is the first time that they have their own land, the first time that they are unified, and they're going into the land that God promised them. By going into that land, God has given them a law, and they're supposed to abide by the law. As oftentimes I've told everybody that the Old Testament, every account that we see, every story that we read, it is going to be based on how the people of God followed the law or didn't follow the law. In other words, there are going to be consequences for not following the law, and there will be a blessing for following the law. So the whole Old Testament, that is what you're going to base it on. Did they follow the law? Because they were given the law before they went into the promised land. Did they follow the law or didn't they follow the law? Of course, we're going to read, of course, they didn't always follow the law, and we find out what the consequences were, and we find out what happened. And so that is what it's about. Now, Joshua is pretty much, I'm going to tell you this, and however you want to take it, if you want to write it down, record it, or however, it's divided into basically three parts. The whole book of Joshua is in three basic parts. And you can't read it and say, okay, this is part one, this is part two. But the circumstances that happen. The first of the three parts is that they go and have conquest. There's a conquest that they have to defeat the people who have occupied the land. The children of Israel have not been in that land since Abraham, and that Abraham has been absent 430 years. The Bible documents that 430 years. So in 430 years, other people have inhabited that land. So you've had generations of people. And of course, if you've been in a land 430 years, your grandmama, your granddaddy, their grandparents, and you consider that to be your heritage, your land. But the children of Israel have always considered it to be theirs because God gave it to Abraham. So when you read the book of Joshua, the first part is always going to be about conquest. How did they conquer the land? And then the second part is going to be about the division of the land. What do I mean by that? I have told you on various occasions that the 12 tribes of Israel, actually there are now 13, Joseph boys made it, and you have to extract Levites because the Levites really, they don't divide the land up with Levites. Levites do not receive a specific piece of land. They are supposed to be provided. They don't have to plant. They don't have to raise cattle. All y'all other people are supposed to provide for them because they are the keepers of the house of God. And they shouldn't have to work. Their work is the house of God, which that concept supposedly continued. It's supposed to be that way now, that those who are in charge of the house of God should not have to go out into varying jobs. The people of God are supposed to take care of them so they won't have to do that. Some religious organizations continue to follow that concept, while others say, no, he got to go work. And he got to work too. All right, but that was the concept that the children of Israel had, that the whole tribe, everybody who was in the tribe of Levi was assigned a job that had to do with the house of worship, whatever that was at the time, whether it was the tent, what they call tabernacle, and that's why we can't get the words, the meanings of words mixed up with its current use when we think about its biblical use. A tabernacle to them was a tent. When we think of tabernacle, we think of a large building like our association building. And in Kinston, they got one they call the tabernacle. And tabernacle biblical was just a tent. But it was the place where they stored all of the things that came from God, and the place that they went to worship God and to give God sacrifice of whatever needed to be done. So, when we are thinking about how they divided up the land, I said that Israel itself, or the land that they had in Canaan, there was a seaside. It's kind of like, well, it's like North Carolina. It's not like the United States, because the United States has gone from sea to shining sea. But Israel has a coastline, it has a coastal plain, then it has mountains, but it doesn't have another coast. All right, so you have to consider that. So, certain tribes were given coastline. So that means those individuals ended up, when you look at the New Testament, they're fishermen. They just work for the sea. Then you got some who are sheep herders, and you got some that are dwelling, who are farmers and harvest, because they're always talking about the harvest is plentiful and the laborers are few. So you got people who are on the seashore, who are fishermen, those who are in the plains, who are farmers, and those who are sheep herders in the mountains and all of that. And so they divided up into their varying lands. And so that would be the third part. The third part is once you have been divided in, as part 2 says, now you got to settle in that land. And once they settled in that land, a strange phenomenon took place, wherein they came in united as one group. When they got their little section of land, this is ours, and we don't care nothing about y'all in the mountain. If somebody attack y'all in the mountain, that's y'all business. We're not coming to help you. We only going to do what we do on the seashore. If nobody don't bother us on the seashore, we're fine. They forgot that they were brothers to each other. And so what ends up happening is when we get to the book of Judges, we'll see what takes place from there. Questions, comments thus far? But I don't want to get too far ahead of what you understand and then, have to backtrack. Now, coming into this land of Canaan that they have occupied, when you read it, you'll find out that there really only were 3 cities that they had contact with. The first one was Jericho. And everybody here heard about the walls of Jericho falling down. Why did they have to go to Jericho? Well, Jericho was like the passageway into that region. It was the passageway into that region. You couldn't get into the land without first going to Jericho. So Jericho was not just something that you hear in the Bible. It was a strategic place that if you're going to take over the land, you got to take over Jericho. It was like a fortified city, a walled city. And the children of Israel didn't have any weapons. They didn't have any battering rams. And now we began to start putting an application to what God has told them. If you follow the law, follow my commandments, you'll be victorious. And that still is for us now. But it was to God's people. And, of course, Jericho, which was the strongest city, they didn't have to get any bows and arrows. They didn't have to build any battering rams. They walked around the city. When you read the story, I'm not going to tell it all, but they walked around the city and the walls fell down. That's just how God worked with them. But then the next city that they had to encounter was, I said it was called Ai. But it's spelled AI, so it has nothing to do with artificial intelligence. It was I. And the same token, if they could destroy a city without doing anything because they followed God, the second thing is they went to Ai and didn't follow God's direction. And as a result, the Bible says that they had to turn and run away. Children of Israel had to run away from the people of Ai because they didn't follow God's instruction. And when you read the story, of course, eventually they got back on track, and of course they were able to defeat the enemy. And those were the main things that happened in their, first of all, I said that's part of the conquest. They had to destroy these places in order to settle. Now, the main thing comes up, and I think we have talked about this before. They were given instructions by God, what we call genocide today, Kill everybody. Everybody. Man, woman, boy, and girl. We don't want no evidence. We don't want any of their culture to be in existence. And of course, we're looking at it from our eyes today and said, wait a minute, that's against what God said in the law. Because we read the law and the sixth commandment said, thou shalt not kill. But I have tried to explain, and if you have been to enough sessions, you'll understand that if we translated the original word that they had, and it came out to be kill, and we look at our dictionary and find the word kill, there will be 17 different word definitions that say kill. The murder, homicide, I know murder, homicide. Well, you can look it up and you'll see. So I've always tried to own up to the fact, because we can't make God out of a liar. Let God be true and every man be a liar. So the kill that is in the Ten Commandments was, the definition should be murder. All right. Am I following? Am I losing anybody? If you look up the word kill, even right now on your electronic device, you'll see a list of names. You look at the Thorndike Barnhart, or you look at Webster's collegiate dictionary, you'll see at least 17 different words that mean kill, and they're all in the English language. But all of them, somebody gonna be dead either way, but all of them don't say the word murder. And the Ten Commandments should be thou shalt not murder, because God told them to kill. So if God told them to kill, then then it would be contradicting himself. He said, don't kill nobody. And he told them to kill somebody. So we have to understand the difference. So when we're talking about warfare, warfare is not killing unless they do outside the books. There are people being prosecuted for killing people in Vietnam, because sometimes they did go beyond the kill that they were called. They went beyond the rules of engagement, and they might have committed murder. So murder, even though dead is dead, there's a difference in kill and murder. Oh yeah, well, that is true. In other words, the tongue itself hinges on the gates of hell, and words can be dangerous. I know there is a philosopher who said, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt. Yes, they will. Everybody knows that words hurt, and they kill and destroy. Words can do that. And that's why, when you talk about people slandering, but then again, Jesus comes back and said, blessed are ye when men shall revile you. And that means talk about you, revile you and persecute you, and say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Now, if they're telling stuff that's true, that ain't the same thing. But when you do it falsely, your reward is in heaven. God is blessed, has a blessing in store for you. But in reference to when God gave them the command to kill everybody, it's the same as what the people who are Islamic are doing in Gaza when they are the Hamas. They're doing what they call jihad. Jihad means to kill people who are not in compliance with their God. And that's everybody who is in the West. That means everybody who is not Islam. If they declare jihad, then they're supposed to kill and destroy you by whatever means necessary. And so they justify it by that, because that's what Muhammad told them to do. There's a jihad, but if we look at it from what Joshua was doing, that was jihad. They were asked to kill everybody because of the fact they didn't follow their God. Let me give you some real reasons why they had to do jihad. And you don't always see this everywhere. It's because the people in that region followed certain gods. They were Canaanites. They followed Baal. You'll see that name over and over again. Ashtaroth. You'll see that once in a while. You see various versions of Ashtaroth. But you always see Baal, even up until the New Testament, because they said that Jesus must have been a son of Baal. They're saying he was son of the devil in a polite way. Beelzebub is another derivative of the name Baal. But all of these were gods that the people worshiped and did not worship the God of creation. Now, Baal is the god of fertility, of the rain and fertility. And so the people worship that, but they worship by practicing cultic prostitution and what they didn't call it sodomy then, but we call it sodomy now because we named what they did with the town that they were in. Before they were doing sodomy, before we had given it the name sodomy. They just happened to live in Sodom when we first started recording it. Now, y'all can ask me the questions. That way I can help you while we're in this conversation. Because if I get too far beyond, you still say, what did he say? Well, if you've ever heard of sodomy, sodomy is the act. But the city that they were practicing it in was a place called Sodom, which predates Joshua. All right, so the sodomy was already in practice when Joshua came there, and the people that was a part of the practice, it just so happened that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed because not of just sodomy, but because of their relationship with their God, whom they practice it for. A lot of times people even use that now, say that, in fact, I've heard it used. In fact, it was Falwell, and Falwell used it too, said it. And a man who was President Obama's pastor before Obama was kind of forced to leave Jeremiah Wright's church. He was kind of pretty much forced to leave there because Jeremiah pretty much said that if God don't punish America, he needs to give Sodom and Gomorrah an apology. Now, some people didn't catch that, and some people did. If God don't destroy America, he needs to give Sodom and Gomorrah an apology. Now, Jeremiah Wright ain't the first one that said that. Jerry Falwell said it too. That there's so much homosexuality in America that we ought to be, fire and brimstone ought to fall on us too. But here's the thing, I'm putting in a lot of stuff that you got to link together. Sodom and Gomorrah didn't have to be destroyed if there were 10 righteous people. At first, Abraham was told that they were going to be destroyed because they were practicing false religions. They were false Baal. They were still worshiping Baal. And I could go back, if you ever look up Baal and try to look up the history of Baal, it will go all the way back to Nimrod. I mean, it depends on how much you want to study, but Baal, its origin will go all the way back to Nimrod, who was the first king of the world, who was in opposition to God because he wanted to do opposite of what God said. God said, be fruitful and multiply, spread across the whole world. He said, no, we're going to stay right here, and we're going to build a tower all the way up to God. We're going to do the opposite of what God said. And so he is the author and finisher of gods who were in opposition to God. And all the other gods who are opposition to God are in league with Satan, because Satan is the original opposition to God. Stop me when you get ready now. Stop me when you get ready. I'll elaborate. I'll elaborate. All right, now, getting back to the genocide. Why God wanted that destroyed, he wanted them destroyed because not only did these religions in that region worship Baal and practice promiscuous sexual activity, wherein God, in his law to his people, wanted one man for each woman. They wanted one man, one woman, as opposed to Abraham, as opposed to David, as opposed to Solomon. All of them were still in opposition to God's law. Y'all realize that, right? I know they're in the Bible and they were exalted, and David was a man after God's own heart, but he was in opposition to God's law. One man, one wife. And these people who got sister wives, y'all ain't never heard that. In other words, they got multiple wives, and they say it was in the Bible. And I try to tell people all the time, just because in the Bible don't mean it's right. It's in the Bible so that you will know what happened, and those who were in opposition to God, their story is there. It wasn't right with God, and you see the ultimate consequence or the blessing. It's there. Truly stated don't mean it's what's supposed to happen. Just call Abraham, he ended up having a child. The first child he had was by a maid servant. And then, of course, when we start reading the story of Solomon, he's the ultimate opposition to God, and he was given wisdom by God to do the right thing. And he did great good. He united the whole kingdom. Just as soon as he died, the kingdom fell apart. Just as soon as he died, the kingdom fell apart. It wasn't long. His son fell apart, but he ended up 300 wives, 700 concubines. Now, I looked up Wikipedia, and they said it the opposite. So keep in mind that Wikipedia don't tell you this. They don't have it right all the time. A whole lot of stuff they don't have right. I found a lot. Of course, they tell you can go in and correct their stuff. They want you to correct it, but they have it wrong in Wikipedia. Because there was some trivia that asked about his wives and his concubines, which he ended up with. If you say he had 1,000 women, you might be right. But if you do it, the Bible says he had 300 wives, 700 concubines. Wikipedia says he had 700 wives, 300 concubines, which is wrong. But questions, comments? So just because it's in the Bible does not make it right. It only means that it's stated. And that's what they did. And the Bible is not trying to pull punches, even though it does pull some punches on some, when we get to it and you match up Chronicles and Kings, they did pull some punches because they try to make David right. They try to make him, they try to whitewash him. Even though they say they have some good details, they try to whitewash some of the bad details. But they give you the right history. But he did not do everything right. All right. But he's exalted now because everybody is following like David is the great architect almost. Okay, let's go on. Questions, comments. Now, getting back to Joshua, I'm saying that he was given the authority to have conquest in the land, and of course, in order to have conquest, he had to have warfare, and warfare was justified by God because it was not killing is not what you do. It's not, murder is not what you do when you have a war. It's supposed to be killing. And so thou shalt not kill is not the right word to say when you're saying the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not murder would be the most appropriate use of the word kill. The most appropriate use would be murder in the case of the Ten Commandments. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna move on. Good. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Okay. No, I'm okay. 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 I beg to differ because here's what's happened is that when we translated it into our language, we are the ones who specified kill instead of looking at how kill is has a wide number of actual words that mean the same thing but from a different viewpoint. So when they were given, when if we look at the reality of what they were given, they were also told, if we read the law in Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, they said if you kill a man's servant, it goes on to tell you what the repercussions of it were. But when it said war, and once again, that's translation too, because if you would kill another man's servant, that's murder. But like I said, our translation is the thing that did that, because God made a distinction when he told them to go to war. Then they were told what the difference was, but we have all made it one word in our translation. If you read Hebrew, Hebrew would have you saying the murder, pretty much, because it would distinguish between what kind of killing are we doing. Killing an animal is not the same thing as murder, because you can kill an animal for food. And that's why animals who kill animals mostly only kill for food, and mankind is supposed to only kill for food, but we kill for sport. Now it's a whole different story too. But that's the distinction. But in humanity, if God told them to destroy the enemy, but at the same time, he tells you you can't kill another human being just because you don't like them or because they did something to you, or even by accident. It even has accidental killing, which we would say an accidental killing. We would call that something different than murder. But in the Bible, it's only going to have kill. Now, just we try to make a distinction between justifiable homicide but it's still the person still dead. But you say you had just reason to do it, and you can get off on that. But murder, and then we put degrees on it: first, second, third degree murder. But killing in war is different than killing somebody. So God made a distinction. They knew it, but we are the ones having a problem with it because of the way it was translated into the English language. Because every other country in the world, when they use the word kill, they're going to tell you which kill it is. America is the only one that you look up kill, and then you see all the other ways you can say kill. But in other countries, say for instance, that's how we got when you have the Greek which the New Testament was primarily translated from. It's a different word for love your brother, love your dog, love your mother, and love your wife. There are 4 different ways to say love, but they use different words for it. And instead of, we just say, I love my dog, I love my mother. I love my wife. We use the same word. They're going to use 3 different words. When they say love God, the word is agape. And it still means love. And they're going to say love my brother, philo. That's where we get Philadelphia. Delphi is the city of brotherly love. And each one of them in our language, we still say, I love my brother. And they're going to say philo, my brother. And when they, and people who just, there's a whole lot of different ways. But they're going to use the word that they mean. When they say love God, we're just going to say L-O-V-E God. They're going to say agape. When you say love your wife, it ain't the same love. And of course, the ecstasy part, all of that, that's a part of love word too. But we still are going to use the same word love for your dog, your brother, your mama, and your wife. The same word. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. All of those things. You can. It goes to that part because the whole thing is what sin is, if we try to categorize it, but sin is just disobedience to God. That's disobedience to God. So we can whitewash it and say this sin is bigger than that sin. In God's sight, it's all sin is sin. We're the ones who try to distinguish. But going back to what you were saying, the same way we talk about love in the English language, love is one word that means different things. Kill is one word that means different things. But in other people's languages, they distinguish. They have a different word for each time they say love. Each time that they mean love, it's a different love. Because when they, and that's a classic example in the Greek when they use philo as brotherly love, and they use agape as godly love. And there's a couple of, I tell people I've forgotten more than I than I know now. I've forgotten more. But and then when you use there are a couple other words that mean love, right? That mean love, but in the English language, we just have one word that describes all these types of love, which would be confusing to somebody who came from somewhere else. Because if you say, I love my dog, and say, well, wait a minute, that should be a different kind of love. I love my brother, that should be a different kind of love. It shouldn't all be the same love. You can't use the same word for your dog and your brother and your mama and your wife. Not saying all of it's love, but there's a different word for it to distinguish. And the same way with killing, it's a different word to describe. Okay, good. I'm glad you asked that question. But we'll find that God wanted them to destroy all of the evidence of a false god. That was what that was about. And that genocide was that. Now, the Muslims who still do that, they are doing it because they got the Old Testament, pretty much. They got it from the Old Testament, and that's what's in the Quran is what was in the Old Testament. And they believe that you're supposed to if you're a proponent of their religion, you're supposed to destroy everybody who is against that religion. And in doing so, you are doing God a favor. And that is why they told these people who were suicide bombing that if you kill infidels, then you have a place in heaven. But then they gave some crazy examples. They told young men that you have 72 virgins that will be yours in heaven. I mean, for real, they tell them that. And for those who did not know the Quran, they believe that so there is no marrying or giving in marriage in heaven. Jesus told them that, or he told us that, because a whole lot of people were wondering, and a question came up. This woman had a husband, and the husband died. And if you go back to the Old Testament, it says that it's lawful for that husband's brother to come forth and take the wife so she wouldn't be a widow. And if he died, if he got another brother, he's supposed to be. So it said he could end up with 7 husbands. So who's going to be, and somebody smart asked that question. They asked Jesus that question. You read it in the gospel. Said, who's going to be her husband when she go to heaven? And he said, there's no marriage or giving in marriage in heaven. So you don't have to worry about that. In fact, I could tell you some more deep stuff about heaven. And that's why everybody in heaven is going to be happy. Not only that, if your grandmother is in heaven looking down on her children, she's not happy. So that means that something has got to happen that she doesn't have memory of what took place in this decrepit world. When you change from mortal to immortality, when you change from earthly to heavenly, that something has to take place in you that causes you not to even realize that you left friends and loved ones, family. Because if you went to heaven with that memory, you can't be happy. It says there are no more tears, no more sorrow. So if you still know that you're looking down, and people say, oh, I know my grandma's looking down on me. If she's looking down at you, but she is not happy. Because it don't look like you're going to get to where she is. And she see that. So she can't have no memory of what you're doing if she's in that place where there is no more tears, no more sorrow, no more sadness, nothing but joy. So something has to happen. And Jesus pretty much said, you don't have to worry about your husband and your wife, and if they made it or didn't make it, you don't have to worry about your mama or your daddy, because none of that is going to be relevant. And that's hard for people to understand, because we've been told so many times. And the preacher get up here and tell you, I know your mama is up in heaven, and you say, yeah, I know she's up there. And she's looking down on you, and you ain't look like you ain't living right to get up there, and she's going to be happy. Consider all of that. I'm not making this up. And the Bible gives us these little snippets that Jesus says and have been told. In fact, you wouldn't have that. The only people who have that memory of what happened are those who are in the second resurrection. And hopefully we'll get to that part at some point in time. Those who are in the second resurrection, they remember everything that happened. They remember everything that happened because it's going to be playing over and over every day of their life. And after they've been there 10,000 years, they have no less days to see it again. Okay. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Like suspended animation. All right. Okay. That wakes you up. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, it does. All right. That's a great concept. That's a great Now I'm gonna tell you another concept, and to tell you why a lot of secular writers have some knowledge of the Bible. If you've ever heard, I'm trying to think, is his name Ichabod Crane, or uh, am I tying in two of his books? But anyway, yeah, Ichabod Crane is another one written by the same author, but Rip Van Winkle, written by the same author of Washington Irving, George Washington Irving. But he slept for 20 years. Just went on a tree, slept for 20 years. I'm just trying to say that this man wrote this, and when he woke up 20 years later, he don't know nothing that happened. People are telling him, look, we have a new country now. We have George Washington. In fact, he said, is George the king? No, George is the president. But he was talking about George the king of England, because George the king of England was the king of England when America had the revolution. And by this time, George Washington was the president. And so they had to wake him up to that. So I tell people that if you go to sleep for a period of time, you don't know how long you slept. In fact, you'll find that out if you're tired and you go and sit in the chair and nobody don't bother you, and you wake up, you don't know how long you slept. You don't know if you slept 10 minutes. You have to look back at the clock to see how long you did sleep. And if you was home by yourself forever, if you're real tired, you might slept the whole day into the next day. So it doesn't matter if you've been asleep for 200 years. When you open your eyes, you'll see Jesus. So that makes that not to be a falsehood, because when you go to sleep, the first face you'll see is Jesus. Then it doesn't matter how long that's been. And to everybody who awakes, it's almost is that they closed their eyes, and when they opened them again, they saw Jesus. So it doesn't matter how long it was. We're in, and science fiction people in Star Wars and all them, they put people in suspended animation. And they sleep forever how long it takes them to get to where their voyage is. When they awaken, they don't know what has transpired. And that's the same with us. We won't know, because if we were aware, we would be worried, we'd be crying or whatever. So that's why, and going back again, your grandmama in heaven can't be looking down on what's going on. And she see all of her children, her grandchildren. They ain't doing nothing. They stopped going to church when she died. They were doing all right until she passed away. And when she passed away, now everybody running wild. And ain't nobody going toward heaven. And she can't be happy. She can't be without sorrow. So that would make let God be true and every man be a lie. I believe what God said, that if you're in heaven with him, there's nothing but joy, no more tears, no more sorrow, no remembrance of any bad thing. The only ones who have memories of that are the people who are in the second resurrection, because they stand before us and they go over and try to justify why they did not get caught up in the first resurrection. They're trying to justify that. They're trying to tell all them lies over again as to why they heard the man preaching and they just didn't believe it. Well, they got to go over that again. And that's forever and ever. And that's everybody else who did not make it in. Okay. Time. I'm glad you bring that up. Somebody else has some kind of situation like that they want to talk about. But here is I wanted to get through Joshua, because Joshua is the one who was committed to doing the genocide. He didn't do his job. And that is why, for the rest of the New for the rest of the Old Testament, they're going to be harassed by the children of the people they didn't kill. For the next generations, over the next 400 or 500 years, the descendants of the people they didn't kill are always going to hate the children of Israel, even to this very day. They still hate them because in their family history, all they can talk about are the children of Israel came and took their land. That's what's happening right now in Gaza and Hamas and all that, because they are the descendants of the people that the children of Israel, the Jews, they weren't Jews then, the Jews now are the descendants of the people who came with Joshua. We're making it real. That's real. And they've done it more than one time. As we'll go through the history, the children of Israel were kicked out of that land, put somewhere else because they didn't follow God's law. I told you the consequence. And they end up, God allowed them to come back, a second Exodus, allowed them to come back, reestablish it. And then by the time we get to the New Testament, they're so, I would say, they're so afraid that God is going to allow that to happen to them again until they reject Jesus. Because they think they're trying to be so righteous, they are overly righteous. And they're overly being righteous. They reject Jesus, and it won't be long until all of them are kicked out of Israel again. In 70 AD, they're kicked out again, and they don't come back until 1948. And now they're fighting the war again with the people that were there, who their descendants can go back to before Joshua came. Keep that in mind. Question coming. That can be mind-boggling, to some people it's just a flow, but that's really how it is. They're the same people they're fighting now that Joshua didn't kill when he came. The descendants of those people are there right now, and Israel has got some people that say we need to kill them now. That's why they're still bombing those people in Gaza. They're trying to do it now. And the world is watching, and nobody in the world agrees with them. No, you just can't go and kill men, women, boys, and girls. You should have did it when you first had the chance. You can't do it now. And they're blaming on the fact y'all haven't turned over the hostages. October 7th, when y'all took my people, they done killed thousands of people since then. In fact, it might be 1 million. They are still killing them, starving them out. And the world looking on, and people who protested because Trump don't know whose side he on. He keeps switching sides because they could have stopped it a long time ago. United States could. But they're giving them bigger bombs. We got some people in America who say, yeah, we're all for Israel no matter what they do. And what they're doing now is wrong. And everybody who say they're wrong get persecuted. That's why they're persecuting the black people in South Africa. And I'm gonna tie this all in. The president of South Africa visited Trump today. And Trump is saying the reason why he brought them white folk over here from South Africa is because the black people were persecuting them. And those same white people have been persecuting the black people for 300 years. And here's what's happening. About 10% of the population is white, and they own 90% of the land. 10% of the population is white. They own 90% of the land. And because since we had the time, Nelson Mandela, he stayed in jail 30 plus years protesting that. When he came out, eventually he became the president. And they're still trying to get some of the stuff back for black people. And part of that was let's look at everything that white people got and say, we're trying to share it, break it up. And these people are saying that they persecuted them, which they're not even the people that persecuted. I heard one person say that one of the families who left South Africa and got on the plane and came over here, he just didn't want to pay his mortgage. He just didn't want to pay no more bills. And so he's over in America and they're giving them free stuff. They put him ahead of the line of people who've been waiting 2 or 3 years. Okay. Questions, comments? Now, they put a pastor out of the church because he talked about stuff like I'm talking. They put him out. They sure did. They put him out because they said that ever since Trump got in office, all things he been talking about too much social stuff. Well, that's what Jesus did. Jesus talked about feeding the poor, making sure you had the pulpit. He made sure that he was doing the thing that Reverend Dr. Barber is doing. And those people, they putting in jail now. Or they're talking about what people are doing to poor people, as Trump is doing to us now. Because every poor person is going to be affected. And yes, they're going to kick some people off Medicaid. They're going to cut them, even though they say they ain't going to cut Medicaid, they already cut it. It's already cut. Head Start and some of the programs that we cover, they already been cut. We already started laying off people. Because the money not coming out, they just cut it. And they already cut WIC. That's what poor people, right? That's where they get the money. That's where they get the milk and stuff from. That's poor people. Okay. And he done lied about that and said it was a gift. Them come to find out they negotiated to get it. And he making that lie up that they gave it to him. They ain't gave him nothing. But then people believe it now, and everybody who object to it, they just don't like President Trump. Okay, I still pray. I pray for President. I don't have anything against him personally. Well, I do have something against the person. I don't have anything against his office. President of the United States, we lift that up. We pray for the office and whoever occupies it. And my prayer is that they would adhere to God. And every leader, that's what we pray for, is that they would adhere to God's rule. If they would adhere to God's rule, then if the leader is for God, the nation will be blessed. And that comes straight from the Bible. That's what he told David. If you would keep my commandments, not only will I bless you, but I'll bless the country. So every country that follows, the leader that follows God will be blessed. It don't matter if all the people ain't doing right or nothing. That ain't what God said. God said if the leader is following and lifting up my will and my word, then I will bless the nation. If my people will call by my name, they will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and I will heal the land. That's why we're in such a mess. Because we don't have nobody who's willing to follow God. They trying to follow the money. Follow the money. Follow the money. Yeah. Oh, he hold his Bible upside down, so I know. We're gonna stop tonight. We only have one more week, and we're gonna go from Joshua to Judges, because that's where we get the contrast. I want to tell you this before we do that. Joshua is considered to be one of the best stories of the children of Israel, the book of Joshua. Judges is considered to be the worst story told about the children of Israel. So you'll see the contrast when we come back next week. Any questions or comments? Okay. We got a designated prayer warrior tonight. Okay. Oh, it was her night. That one. No, she said why she was not here. She gave a reason. Thank you, Lord. Yes. Thank you, Jesus. Amen. Thank you all for joining in, and we look forward to seeing you on next week. Continue to pray for us.